There is a nostalgic image we all carry of America in the 1950s. A modest house with a picket fence, one parent working, the other staying at home, a car in the driveway, summer barbecues, college tuition that cost a few $100 a year, a pension at the end of a 40-year career. This wasn't a fantasy, it was a reality for millions, not all, of course. Black Americans, immigrants, women, and other marginalized groups were excluded in many ways. But for the included, that middle class dream was real, tangible, livable. So what happened? We're going to get there in a sec. I want to ask you to give this video a like and subscribe. So let's go back. After World War II, America stood almost untouched, while Europe and Asia were in rubble. The US had half the world's industrial output. It was the world's factory. The GI Bill educated millions of returning soldiers. Unions were powerful. Corporate taxes were high. CEOs earned about 20 times what their average worker earned. Today, it's over 300 times. This wasn't socialism. This was regulated capitalism, a sort of capitalism with a seatbelt. And for about 30 years, from the late 40s to the early 70s, that system built the largest middle class in the world history. But that growth wasn't an accident. It was a political project. It came with strong guardrails, progressive taxation, labor protections, antitrust enforcement, investment in public infrastructure, and education. And here's the critical thing. It also served a global purpose. The United States needed to prove to the world that capitalism could produce dignity, while communism offered only control. The middle class wasn't just an economic category, it was a geopolitical weapon. Then came the pivot. Starting in the 70s and accelerating into the 80s, under Ronald Reagan, the guardrails came off. Deregulation, trickle-down economics, union busting, financialization. The promise was that unleashing the free market would make everyone wealthier. But what really happened? CEOs got wealthier. Workers got squeezed. Wall Street exploded while factories closed. Pension turned into 401ks. Secure jobs turned into gigs. Homes became investments, not shelter. College became a lifetime of debt. The tools that created the middle class were either dismantled or turned into traps. Want to get ahead? Take out student loans. Want to live safely? Buy a house, even if it costs 6 times your income. Want to retire? Better hope the stock market doesn't crash. In today's America, the middle class doesn't feel like a promise. It feels like a balancing act on a crumbling bridge. And that's where we are now. We have record-breaking corporate profits and record-breaking credit card debt. We have billionaires going to space, while teachers work 2 jobs and still cannot afford rent. We have freedom on paper, but most people don't even feel free to take a sick day. And it's not just the poor of the working class who are hurting. It's the so-called middle class, the group that was once the core of American stability. They're burning out, drowning in invisible pressure. They're working harder than their parents ever did, and still they're falling behind. And here's the thing. Many don't even realize it's systemic. They blame themselves for not budgeting better, for not picking a more practical degree, for not working enough hours, as if burnout is a personal failing instead of a byproduct of a rigged economy. This isn't just decline, it's gaslit decline. And it's dangerous because a collapsing middle class doesn't just mean economic instability, it means political instability. Historically, middle class erosion is one of the key ingredients in the rise of authoritarian regimes. So this is not just about economics. It's about democracy. It's about whether a society can survive when the very people who built and sustained it no longer believe they have a future in it. If part 1 of this video was about what happened, this part is about why. Because none of this The collapse of the middle class, the rise of economic anxiety, the political polarization is random. There are entire schools of thought, theories, and framework that map out exactly how societies fall apart. And disturbingly, America is following the script almost perfectly. Let's start with one of the most compelling. The Strauss-Howe generational theory. Ever heard of the fourth turning? It sounds like something out of fantasy fiction, but it's real. Theory of history proposed by William Strauss and Neil Howe in the 90s. Their argument is simple, but very profound. History moves in cycles. Roughly every 80, 100 years, society resets itself through a major upheaval. They divide this cycle into 4 turnings, each lasting about 20, 25 years. The high post-crisis unity and growth, the awakening spiritual rebellion, questioning institutions, the unraveling fragmentation, loss of trust, the crisis, massive restructuring, often involving war or revolution. Let's apply that to the US. Post-Second World War boom, the high, the 1960s, 70s civil rights movement, the awakening, 1980s and 2000s rise of individualism, erosion of trust in government, the unraveling. Now we're in the crisis, the forced turning. And this isn't just a theory about vibes. Past fourth turning in US history, the American Revolution in 1776, the Civil War 1860s, World War II and the Great Depression in the 1940s. Each one about 80 years apart. Each one massive, identity altering, and violently disruptive. Each one ended one version of America and gave birth to another. Now, ask yourself, when was the last time America found a mentally reset itself? World War II ended in 1945. We're due. And here we are. Political institutions are barely functioning. Trust in media is at historic lows. Civic life is disintegrating, and leaders from both sides are talking about saving America, but no one agrees what that even means. Strauss and Howe didn't predict specific events, but they predicted the pattern. And the pattern is playing out in real time. The second theory, Peter Turchin's structural demographic theory. If the fourth turning is a cultural map, Turchin's theory is a mathematical one. Peter Turchin is a scientist. He's originally trained in ecology, who began studying how empires rise and fall. And what he found was terrifyingly consistent. According to Turchin, there are 3 major forces that lead to societal collapse. First, elite overproduction. Too many ambitious elites, not enough elite jobs. Think about it. Law degrees, MBAs, PhDs, all these credentials, but where are the seats of power to match them? Result, elite infighting, political sabotage, radicalization. Sound familiar, right? Second, popular immersation. Rising inequality, falling wages, basic needs unaffordable. It's not just poverty, it's despair. People feel like they'll never get ahead, no matter what they do. And when that despair hits the middle class, revolution is around the corner. Third, state fiscal stress. Governments become bloated, corrupt, or dysfunctional. They can't respond to crises, can't meet the need of its citizens, or worse, they only serve the interests of the elite. Turchin modeled hundreds of years of historical data and found that these forces tend to converge roughly over 50 to 60 years. In 2010, he published a paper predicting that the United States would reach a period of political violence and upheaval around 2020. It looks like he wasn't wrong, and he's not finished. Turchin now says the worst is yet to come unless major structural changes are made now. Not small reforms, not surface level tweaks, deep foundational rebalancing of power, of wealth, of opportunity. And as of now, there's little political will to do that. Very little. Third, late stage capitalism and other frameworks that fit. Even outside of Strauss, Howe, or Turchin, there are plenty of other thinkers whose models apply. Late stage capitalism, for example, isn't a formal theory, but it's a useful term to describe what happens when capitalism becomes self-destructive. When housing is no longer shelter, it's a speculative asset. Medicine is no longer care, it's a profit engine. Education is no longer a right, it's a lifelong debt. Work is no longer a path to freedom, it's a hamster wheel. You reach a point where everything is monetized, even hope, even despair. And at that point, people either burn out or burn the system down. There's also the Pareto principle, which says that 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. But in power structures, it often means that 20% of people hold 80% of wealth. In the US, it's more like 1% controlling 90%. That imbalance creates unrest. Historically, when wealth concentrates like that, revolutions follow. We could even go further back to political philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. They all asked the same question: what does society owe its people? And what happens when it stops delivering it? I didn't grow up in the US, so I came in with fresh eyes. I saw the wealth, the options, the freedom on the surface, but underneath is brittle. It feels like the system is overloaded, like something big is coming and no one wants to name it. And here's the hardest part. I don't think the average person even realizes we're in a predictable pattern because we're not taught history as a cycle. We're taught it like a straight line, like everything always gets better. But that's not how history works. Predictions, where could this go? If everything we've talked about so far is true, if the American middle class is collapsing, and if history runs in cycles, then the natural question is, what happens next? Where does this all lead? And I'll be honest with you, the range of possibilities is wide. From mild stagnation to total collapse, from reform to revolution, from autocracy to renewal. Let's break down a few of the most plausible paths. Some are dark, some offer hope, but none of them are fantasy. So, first, the authoritarian drift, the soft collapse. This is the path that doesn't feel like a crisis at first. It feels like restoring order, like cracking down, like protecting American values. But under the surface, institutions are dying. Imagine a future where elections still happen, but districts are so gerrymandered and rules so selective that outcomes are predecided. The courts side more and more with corporations, politicians, and police, not the people. Immigration policy turns into political cleansing. Dissent is labeled as extremism. Protesters get labeled as domestic threat. Surveillance increases, but transparency decreases. It doesn't look like 1930s fascism. It looks more like Hungary under Viktor Orban or Russia under Putin. in the early 2000s, before the mask fully came off. You can still go to brunch, you can still post memes, you can still vote, but your vote doesn't really change anything. The collapse isn't a sudden fall, it's slow choking, like watching your democracy suffocate through a plastic bag while being told everything's fine. And the terrifying part is this is the easiest path for the ruling class to maintain power. They don't need tanks, they just need enough people to stop paying attention. Second option, Japan-style stagnation. This is the quiet apocalypse. No civil war, no police state, no martial law, just stagnation. A shrinking birth rate, young people giving up on marriage, children, or home ownership, a culture of burnout and isolation, innovation without meaning, economic activity continues, but inequality grows. The rich get richer, everyone else just floats. Think of Japan in the 90s, the lost decades. A technologic ally, advanced, orderly society where the youth began checking out of life altogether. You see versions of this already. People don't dream of owning homes anymore. They dream of paying off debt. People aren't chasing careers. They're just trying not to break. People aren't having families. They're building coping mechanisms. It's not dystopia. It's not utopia. It's just a flat line. No collapse, no rebirth, just a beautiful hollow shell of a once great power. Number 3. Germany, Scandinavia style reform. Now, let's imagine something harder, but better. A path where Americans, especially younger generations, start pushing not just for resistance, but for reform. Not just anti-Trump, not just anti-corporate, but pro-restructuring. In this version of the future, universal health care becomes a right. College is made free or debt-free. The housing market is decommodified. Worker cooperatives grow. Voting is made accessible and secure. Climate policy is tied to jobs and justice. This is what countries like Germany did after their own collapse. It's what Scandinavian countries chose to do rather than let capitalism run wild. It's not perfect, but it's stable, it's functional, it values human dignity over shareholder profit. But here's the thing. This path takes the most work because it's not the revolution that happens when the pain becomes too much. It's the reform that requires foresight before collapse. And right now, American politics is allergic to foresight. We just don't do that. Number 4, the radical reset, revolution or collapse. Now let's talk about the loudest, most chaotic option, a full-scale political reset. This could take many forms. A constitutional convention, some movements, widespread unrest that forces systemic change, a new political coalition, maybe youth-led, maybe labor-led, maybe entirely digital, that rewrites the rules of power. This isn't just about changing policies. It's about tearing down the system and rebuilding it from the ground up. Now, revolution sounds sexy on the surface, but it's also incredibly dangerous because revolutions can be co-opted. Power vacuums attract opportunists. History shows us that revolutionary movements often devour themselves. The French Revolution led to Napoleon. The Russian Revolution led to Stalin. The Arab Spring led to civil war. Still, it reforms continue to fail and collapse, accelerates a radical reset becomes more likely. The question is, who will lead it? The people or the opportunists? That's why we need to be vigilant about the narratives that rise during chaos, because collapse doesn't always lead to liberation. Sometimes it leads to Caesar. So, which path are we on right now? Some days I think we're in the slow collapse. Other days it feels like we're in revolutionary freefall, and occasionally, rarely, I see sparks of real reform. But here's what I know for sure: the future is not inevitable. It's being shaped right now by what we tolerate, what we resist, and what we build. What kind of country do you want your kids to inherit? What version of America are you helping to write? So could the US become Russia? That's a serious question, and let's try to address that. You probably heard people say it. America is becoming Russia. Usually it's said half joking, half panicked, in the wake of political arrests, censorship, ICE raids, or laws that seem designed to punish dissent. But is that accurate? Is the US actually on a path that mirrors Putin's Russia? The answer is complicated. And let's explore it together. First, what is Russia? When people say Russia in this context, they're not talking about Russian people. They're talking about the state, the structure, the political model, right? And that model looks something like this: oligarchic wealth concentrated in the hands of a few billionaires who operate within the blessing of Kremlin. A president for life surrounded by loyalists who control the media, the courts, the military. A culture of fear and surveillance. Political opponents exiled, imprisoned, or assassinated. Nationalism used to justify expansion, repression, and aggression. A passive, exhausted public that has learned to expect nothing and survive in silence. That is Putin's Russia. Now let's compare it. Then, what is America? America, historically, positioned itself as the opposite of that. Free press, an independent judiciary, checks and balances, civil society, accountability, an empowered middle class that could challenge authority and expect something in return. But in recent years, especially post 9/11, that structure has been eroding. Here are a few signs of American Russification. Oligarchy: the richest 1% now control more wealth than the bottom 90%, and that wealth increasingly buys policy, platforms, and immunity. Executive power consolidation: presidents, especially in recent years, have learned how to govern through executive orders, emergency powers, and loyalist appointments, rather than through consensus. Militarized law enforcement: from ICE raids to SWAT teams to predictive policing, force is no longer just about safety, it's about control. Propaganda and disinformation: Fox News and state adjacent media function less like journalism and more like narrative control. Suppression of dissent: protesters labeled terrorists, journalists jailed for or harassed, whistleblowers punished, not protected. The rise of the cult of personality: a leader not just seen as a politician, but a savior, a symbol, a myth, immune from criticism, outside the law entirely. So yes, in many ways, the US is starting to behave more like Russia. But there is a twist. The US isn't Russia. And that matters. Because while the symptoms may look similar, the origin stories are completely different. Russia never had a true democratic middle class. It went from monarchy to revolution to totalitarianism to managed democracy. Civil society never had a real chance to root itself. America did. The US built the largest middle class in human history. It institutionalized civil liberties. It mass produced the idea of a citizen consumer, someone who expected something back from their country. And that expectation, it still lingers. So when we talk about the US becoming Russia, we have to understand if it happens, it will be a fall, not a shift. Russia is what it is because it never had a different version of itself. America will become Russia by betraying its own myth. And that betrayal, when people finally recognize it, will either lead to resentful compliance, rebellion, or numb surrender. Which path we take depends on what people choose when the betrayal becomes undeniable. The hybrid model, the American Russia. Let's be real, the US probably won't become an exact copy of Russia. It won't have forced disappearances on the same scale. It won't execute journalists on bridges, but it doesn't need to, because it's developing a uniquely American version of authoritarianism. It's a digitally managed soft autocracy. Here's how it works. Surveillance doesn't come from the state. It comes from your phone, your social media, your own data trail. Censorship doesn't come from a ministry. It comes from algorithms, shadow banning, or policy enforcement by privatized platforms. Oppression doesn't come with a gun to your head. It comes with a threat to your visa, your bank account, your ability to work. Loyalty isn't demanded through fear. It's bought with culture wars, identity tribalism, and outrage addiction. And perhaps, most importantly, you can still think you're free. You can still order DoorDash, watch Netflix, and complain about politics online. But you can't stop what's happening, because the real control isn't physical, it's psychological. And I hope you can hear what I say. I've lived under systems where people didn't expect anything, where survival was the only goal. I know what apathy feels like when it turns into a lifestyle. And I'm starting to see it here. I'm not saying America is Russia. I'm saying it's behaving more and more like a country that wants control without accountability and distraction without hope. The scariest thing about authoritarianism isn't the violence, it's how normal it can start to feel. So, what can be done? We're asking ourselves, right? But let's try to figure it out together. So, we've talked about the decline, the theories that predicted it, the future path, the comparisons to authoritarian states. Now, here's the real question, the one people always whisper when the mics are off. Okay, but what can I do? Because here's the truth. Most people aren't apathetic because they don't care. They're apathetic because they feel powerless. And the system wants it that way. It benefits from your exhaustion, from your confusion, from your belief that you, just one person, can't possibly do anything to change a machine this big. But history tells us the exact opposite. Collapse is inevitable only when no one resists. Authoritarianism wins only when people accept it as normal. And systemic injustice only survives when we stop seeing it as a system. So let's talk about what can be done, not in some utopian fantasy, but in the real world, from where we stand right now. Protect your mind. This is first for a reason, because we are not just in a political crisis, we are in a psychological war. The goal of the system is not just to control your body, it's to colonize your attention, to steal your bandwidth, to keep you in a constant state of fear, anger, and exhaustion, so that you never organize. You can only react. And every time we doom scroll, get caught in an algorithmic rage cycle, or fight over headlines while billionaires pass laws in the dark, the system wins. So the first act of rebellion is this: reclaim your mind. Unplug when you need to. Read instead of scrolling. Talk to people, real people in your neighborhood. Make space for reflection, not just reaction. Learn to notice when you're being manipulated. Because if they have your mind, they don't need your vote. No. Second, organize where you are. We tend to think power only exists in Washington, D.C., but some of the most devastating policies in recent years, book bans, abortion restrictions, education rollbacks, started at school boards and city councils. Authoritarianism doesn't always march in with boots. Sometimes it sneaks in through the zoning committee. So, what can you do? Show up to local meetings, run for a board, volunteer for a campaign, start a neighborhood mutual aid group, build something, even small, that connects people to people, not people to platforms. Because the antidote to hopelessness is community, and community is the soil where resistance grows. Stop just protesting. Start pushing policy. Protests are powerful, but protests without pressure becomes performance. We need to demand policy, real structural changes. That means universal health care, voting rights reform, antitrust enforcement, labor protections, housing justice, demilitarization of police, campaign finance reform, climate jobs programs. You don't need to write that legislation, but you do need to support and amplify the people who are doing the work. If you care about change, don't just scream, strategize. Number 4, starve the beast. The system runs on your time, your money, your clicks. So let's talk about how you can pull the plug. Cancel subscriptions to platforms that feed you propaganda. Move your money out of predatory banks. Stop spending on companies that fund political oppression. Buy local when you can. Support independent journalism, educators, and creators. Every dollar you spend is a vote. So vote like it matters, because it does. Okay? Number 5, raise children who know what's going on. This one is personal, because if you're a parent or a teacher or anyone who influences the next generation, you have more power than you even realize. Teach them how to spot propaganda. Teach them what critical thinking actually looks like, what it is. Talk to them about race, class, history, and power. Don't raise obedient citizens. Raise conscious ones. Because no amount of protests can undo what generations of awareness can prevent. Do you understand that? I'm not saying this is easy. I've been overwhelmed. I've felt the weight of it all, the rage, the grief, the dread. I've asked myself more than once, what's the point? What's the point of making this video? But then I remember the point is not to fix the whole system alone. The point is to not let it change me, to not let it convince me I'm helpless, to not let it win by default. Power adapts, so resistance has to adapt faster. You have a toolkit. Guard your attention. It's your most precious resource. Invest in real relationships. The algorithm won't save you. Speak up early and often. Silence is surrender. Support the builders, not just the critics. Stay grounded in reality, not memes, not outrage. Rest, recover, then return again. Because this isn't a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a relay race, and the baton is in our hands now. So, if America collapse is inevitable, maybe, but collapse isn't the end of history. It's a fork in the road. And the question isn't whether we're in decline. We are. The question is, what will we become next? Because history doesn't just happen to us. It's written by the people who refuse to look away. I know this moment feels heavy. It is heavy, but you're not powerless. Every conversation you start, every platform you build, every lie you dismantle, every policy you push, every child you raise to think critically, every system you question or quietly refuse to serve, that is the resistance. And no one can take that from you. I'm not here to tell you how this ends, because I don't know. No one knows. But I know one thing. The most dangerous myth in any collapsing society is the idea that nothing can be done. So do something, say something, build something, protect what's still alive, and help birth what comes next. Don't just stand there. And if this video made you think, please share it. Leave a comment. Talk about it with someone, because silence doesn't save democracies. People do. And history will remember who showed up. It will. Even now. Especially now.